So in this video, I'm going to look at a paper with you called Muscle Strengthening Activities Are Associated with Lower Risk and Mortality in Major Non-Communicable Diseases, a systematic review and meta-analysis of cohort studies. This was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine 2022, a couple of years ago. And basically, they wanted to look at the associations between muscle strengthening activities and the risk of non-communicable diseases and mortality in adults independent of aerobic activity. So this is only for muscle strengthening activities, weight training, resistance training, call it what you will. So they looked at 16 studies, right? And the good news is that muscle strengthening activities were associated with a 10 to 17 lower percent lower risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, total cancer, diabetes, and lung cancer. So that looks good so far. But this here part is where things get a little bit hairy. So J-shaped associations with the maximum risk reduction of approximately 10-20% at approximately 60 to 30 to 60 minutes per week of muscle strengthening activities were found for all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, and total cancer. So first of all, maximum risk reduction, in this case, this is observational data, is not amazing to begin with, right? So you have to take research like this with a grain of salt, but this is the kind of research that is often used to promote stuff like, meat, reducing meat consumption, or that eggs are bad for you, or saturated animal fats. So they use it for that purpose. So the reason I think it's interesting to look at, first of all, let's understand what is a J-shaped association. And also keep in mind this, what I just said, that maximum risk reduction of approximately 10 to 20%, that's relative risk, which is it's still, it's very minuscule, even though it looks like a lot. When it's relative risk, it really is not super useful. Also, we have to remember that this kind of research is confounded because the same two people that they have the same similar data points in terms of age is the same. They might exercise for the exact same time every week, but one could live in a very polluted city, eat bad food and drink alcohol every day and smoke cigarettes, and then the other could live in the suburbs or in the country in fresh air, eating organic food, grows their own food. And so the same amount of exercise would affect those two people in different ways. And this kind of research does not account for that. However, as you will see, when we start looking at the charts, you'll see why it's still significant, and we still have to kind of take it into consideration when we are creating a strength and conditioning program for ourselves, especially if our goal is longevity. If you're an athlete, for example, one of my clients is a professional Major League Baseball pitcher, obviously pro athlete at the elite level. I cannot tell him, you need to exercise less, you need to train less. I have some clients that are as their sport is their kind of their main hobby. They love it, and in with those folks, I cannot tell them you need to exercise less, you need to play less of your sport, because they came to me in order to improve sports performance and recovery. So in those instances, if you're getting paid for it, or if you're super passionate about it, that's totally fine. But we have to understand, we are taking a hit when we're doing a lot of exercise. It's not just aerobic or endurance exercise. It's the same story with weight training. Now, on the other sort of end of the spectrum, if you have an existing health condition or health issue or multiple health issues, or you are kind of, 50 plus, let's say. It's you can't really put an age there, cut off. It's a spectrum. But if you're kind of a little bit older, or if your goal is only longevity, you don't have performance goals, you don't have body composition goals, you don't want to be rock swole, you don't want to be shredded, diced, Um, so if you are one of those two, so you want to restore your health and optimize it and maintain optimal health and longevity, you absolutely do not need a lot of exercise. It's health is done in the kitchen and with the supplementation and stress reduction, and fitness is done with the exercise. Exercise is not the major health thing that makes you healthy. It's the diet, the supplementation, the stress reduction, toxin reduction, getting the metabolism working. The fitness aspect is great. It's great to be fit and feel good and be strong. I just want us to separate the distinction between fitness and health. You can be extremely healthy, not very fit, and you can be extremely fit and very, very unhealthy. So we have to kind of really understand where is the cutoff. And I think this, I try not to ramble too much. Let's just get into the kind of the data a little bit more. But when you kind of see it on the charts, I think it would make a lot of sense for you. So maximum risk reduction at 30 to 60 minutes of muscle strengthening activities per week. Okay, so 30 to 60 minutes. Let's look at just to kind of briefly look at the number. The, so they, for all-cause mortality, let's just go to down to that directly. All-cause mortality. Okay, so we have 47 studies, meta-analyses, 42,000 cases, 263 out of, sorry, 42,000 cases out of 263,000 participants. For cardiovascular disease, it was 16,000 cases out of about a quarter million people. Cancer was 21,000 cases out of about 500,000 people. Okay. Just kind of look at the amount of people being, analyzed as part of this stuff. And then we won't go into the various types of cancers and diabetes, but just let's look at cancer, cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality. Now, for all-cause mortality, I'm going to scroll down directly to the chart. So this is what they talk about when they say a J-shaped association. So as you can see here, we have on this axis here, on the y-axis, the relative risk. So 1.0 is a sedentary person doing no muscle strengthening activities during the week. Okay. Now, as you do more so the x-axis on the on the horizontally, it's minutes. So 0, 50, 100, 150, 200 minutes per week, and 200 minutes per week. That's 5 hours. Okay, 5 hours of weights, basically resistance training. So as we approach 40 minutes per week of muscle strengthening activities, this is where in this sort of set of data, the relative risk is the lowest at 0.83. Okay. Again, relative risk, this much of a relative risk decrease or increase is not super compelling, right? But it's what we have. And the fact is, as you can see, you kind of start going back the other direction. As you go from 50 minutes to 100 minutes, you're actually, the relative risk starts to increase again. And then it start over 100 minutes per week, it starts to then increase faster. And then at about 140 minutes per week, so that's basically two 1-hour sessions and a 20-minute session. then the relative risk at that point goes back to 1.0, same as like a person doing no muscle strengthening activities. And then as that increases, the relative risk starts to approach 1.2. So it's we were down to 0.8 almost. Now kind of the other way, a similar sort of jump in the opposite direction at 200 minutes. So 5 hours a week, your relative risk is like 1 point, okay, that's a 1.15. That's for all-cause mortality. And similarly, the cardiovascular disease, um, we have at 60 minutes per week, the relative risk is 0.82, where it is the lowest. And then after that, it starts to increase. And then at 130 minutes, so about 2 hours per week of muscle strengthening activities, we are back to a relative risk of 1.0. So same as the person doing no exercise, no lifting, no resistance training. And then it starts to again go back up. And at 200 minutes or 5 hours, you are at almost 1.2 relative risk. Okay. And the way the trend looks, the way these two curves look, it looks like the more exercise you're doing, the higher the relative risk, at least according to, to this data. That's the way the trend. So doing it, moral of the story, we can't, I know a lot of folks, especially if you kind of listen to me for a while, or if you're a client, you understand that endurance exercise is not the way to go. But that doesn't mean that we just replace those. Let's say you were doing 3 strength training sessions per week, and then 2 more aerobic cardio, whatever, sessions the other days. That doesn't mean you can just replace those with more weight training or whatever else. I don't think that is actually beneficial for most people. I think that's beyond the threshold of most people as sort of capacity to recover. And I don't think it's necessary unless you're training for a sport, for a specific event, which occasionally we if one, as long as we understand that we are taking that hit in order to compete in a tournament or whatever, that is that is fine. But we have to make sure that our ducks are in a row in terms of the recovery, the post-workout nutrition, sleep, um, everything, diet, supplementation, stress reduction in other areas of life. And then just quickly the cancer one. So the relative risk is lowest at 30 minutes, 0.91, not a big bump. And then the relative risk at 130 minutes per week is 1.1, and then it starts to trend back up, right? So the only sort of anomalous thing was diabetes. There's an L-shaped curve. It seems like more exercise seems to you know reduce or relative risk, which relative risk is really, it's incidence in the data where there's an incidence of death that they can count towards that line. That is what it is. So it's not like if you just start exercising double, triple, uh, whatever, that doesn't mean your risk increases. But in this data set, those that did, for example, for the all-cause mortality, those that did 40 minutes per week were at 0.3 relative risk, and then those that exercised 5 hours a week were like 1.15. So the other direction, about 15% or so. But that's not really the actual risk in physical reality. It's the incidence in the data set where those people that did more exercise, there was a higher incidence of death, if you know what I mean, in the data set. Just kind of the whole uh, risk as a word is a little bit misleading. But what I hope this because these guys looked at about, was it 17 studies, I think I said, 16 or 70 papers. So they're looking at research that has been done over the past couple of decades or so. So what that means is even in this epidemiological sort of associational research, even here, we are seeing that more exercise is actually not associated with an reduced all-cause mortality or cardiovascular disease or cancer. And I'm just gonna quickly tell you, just read what they said. So, where's the conclusion at the end? So the conclusion is good. So if you have to understand, so these folks cannot say they're gonna report something that will not make sure to make sure that their study gets published. They have to not ruffle too many feathers and rock the boat. So what they said was engaging in muscle strengthening activities was associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality and major non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular disease, total cancer, diabetes, and lung cancer. Listen to this now. However, the influence of a higher volume of muscle strengthening activities on all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, and total cancer is unclear, considering the observed J-shaped association. And then they say, in addition, the combination of muscle strengthening activities and aerobic activities may provide a greater benefit for reducing all-cause cardiovascular disease and total cancer mortality. So it's like they just glossed over it because you can't really say something like, it seems like more exercise increases all-cause mortality, cancer, and cardiovascular disease more than 130 minutes. In fact, so basically, if a regular person read the study and then they were telling their friend what they read, assuming they kind of understood what they were talking about, they would say something along the lines of, so a little bit of exercise, like 30 to 60 minutes per week, is probably good for you, but it seems like after above a couple of hours plus, so at a couple of hours per week, it's it doesn't really it's not really that as it's about as good as not doing exercise, basically, at least from this perspective. And then above that, above 130 40 minutes per week, it seems like it's actually harmful because it's associated with a higher incidence of death or an increased relative risk, right? So that's kind of what the data seems to show. And again, they're summarizing and they're analyzing other research that has done the research, right? So after all of this, you so many sort of layers of research and analysis and stuff like that, if you're still not able to obfuscate the fact that more than two hours per week of muscle strengthening activities increases relative risk, it means that it definitely is in there, right? It means that more than 2 3 hours per week of exercise is probably for most people a little bit too much. And again, if you're if you have a health issue, um, if you're older, weaker, this kind of stuff, it's probably doing you more harm than good. I think that is the moral of the story.